Hello, sixth graders. We are starting our fractions unit. Our first lesson is adding and subtracting fractions. Our learning target you need to write down is I can add and subtract like and unlike fractions. We have a vocab here, like fractions. This is when we have fractions that have the same denominator. So the bottom number is the same. So 3/4 and 1/4. These are like fractions. Down here, something to write down. To add or subtract like fractions, add or subtract the numerators and write the result over the denominator. So if you have a denominator that's the same, you just add or subtract the top number and the denominator stays the same. So you should write that part down, and you should also write these examples down. So 5/10 plus 2/10, you add the 5 plus 2, which is 7, and the 10 stays the same. And then for subtracting, same thing, 11/12 minus 4/12, subtract 11 minus 4, keep the 12 the same. So write those parts down. Okay, so when we are adding or subtracting like fractions, so the denominator is already the same, there's a visual over here for you to look at, but all that you need to do, 5 9ths and 2 9ths, you just add the numerator together. I think about like a pizza. If you have a pizza cut into 9 slices, if one person eats 5 and the other eats 2, that's 7 out of the 9 slices, so 7 9ths. And you always simplify your answer if you can. However, 7 and 9 can only be divided by 1. They are in simplest form. Now subtracting 9/10 minus 1/10. Well, 9 minus 1 is 8. Keep the denominator the same. I know that those can both be divided by 2 in order to simplify. 8 divided by 2, 10 divided by 2. So there's my final answer. Again, a visual over here for you. If we have 9 of them and we're taking one of them off, we have 8/10 left. Here's 2 for you to try on your own. Pause, try them, and then come back and check. So if we have 1/6 plus 3/6, we add the 1 plus 3, which is 4/6. And you always simplify your answers. So I know I can divide these both by 2. 2/3. 3/7 minus 1/7. Well, 3 minus 1 is 2. Denominator stays the same, and that's in simplest form. So if the denominator is already the same, you just add or subtract the numerator. Okay, so then we have unlike fractions. So unlike fractions, I'm going to start with that one and then go back to least common denominator. Unlike fractions are fractions with different denominators. Okay, so if we had 4/5 and 9/11, unlike fractions, their denominators are different. Least common denominator is the smallest denominator that the fractions have in common. So it's kind of like the least common multiple, but we're talking about denominators. So if we had 1/2 and 3/4, it would be the smallest number that 2 and 4 both have in common. So I know that their smallest denominator, least common denominator, would be 4, which we'll get into more here as we go. So we here are adding fractions, and they have different denominators, so 1/2 and 1/6. So what I need to do is I need to rewrite these fractions so that they have a common denominator between 2 and 6. So I need to find a number that they can both multiply into. And if you find the least common denominator, then it makes your simplifying at the end easier. I know 2 and 6 can both multiply into 6. So I don't have to change 1/6 at all, but 1/2 I can multiply by 3. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. Now I add, just like before with like fractions, add the numerators. 3 plus 1 is 4, and then you keep the 6. And then we needed to simplify, which would be 2/3. Okay. Little study tip here. Renaming fractions. To rename a fraction, that means to change the fraction. Multiply both the numerator and the denominator of the original fraction by the same number. By doing so, the renamed fraction has the same value as the original one. Subtracting fraction, unlike fractions, it's the same thing. We got to find a number that both 12 and 8 can multiply into. So we want to find the smallest denominator that they would have in common. If you are ever stuck and you can't think of it, or like the least common denominator, or you can't think of something, you can always multiply the fraction or the denominator of one fraction by the denominator of the other. So like in this case, I could multiply by 8 and I could multiply by 12, and then I know I would get the same thing. But I want to find a different number that they have in common. I know that they can both multiply into 24. So I'm going to multiply 12 by 2. Whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So this would be 22 over 24, and we're subtracting. Multiply this side by 3, which would be 9 over 24. 22 minus 9. 22 minus 9 is 13. Keep the denominator of 24. We can always estimate, which is what it's talking about over here, to check to see if our answer is reasonable. 11/12 is really close to 1, and 3/8 is close to half. 1 minus a half is 1/2, and 13, that's what we're doing down here to check. 13/24 is close to half, so that means that my answer makes sense. It's reasonable. So there are 3 here for you to try on your own. Pause, try them, and then come back and check your work. So for 8/9 and 2/3, our least common denominator would be 3. So in order to do that, we have to multiply this side by 3. So the 8/9 doesn't change at all. The 2/3 becomes 6/9. And now we subtract. 8 minus 6 is 2. Keep the denominator of 9. That cannot be simplified, so there's my answer. 5/6 and 3/8, I know that they can both be, or their common denominator would be 24. So I multiply this side by 4, which would be 20/24. And I'd multiply this side by 3, which would be 9/24. 20 minus 9 is 11. Keep the denominator of 24. Can't be simplified. The only number they have in common is 1. So that's my answer. And the last one, 7/8 plus 3/4, common denominator of 8. So I multiply by 2. If you choose a higher denominator that they have in common, it still works, but then you're going to have to simplify at the end. Or you might have to do more simplifying. So 7/8 plus 3 times 2 is 6/8. 7 plus 6 is 13 over 8. So I now have a improper fraction where the numerator is bigger than the denominator. The top number is bigger than the bottom. So I need to turn this into a mixed number. In order to do that, I see how many times 8 fits into 13. Well, I know it fits in there once. And then I have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I have 5 left over out of 8. And that can't be simplified, so that would be my answer. We write it as a mixed number. Okay, we have some real-world questions here. So we have a graph up here to look at. In a recent survey, students were asked what they would choose for a healthy lunch. The results are shown on the graph. What fraction more of students chose salad bar rather than deli? So fractions chose more. That tells me that we are subtracting. So we're going to be doing salad bar minus deli. So we look at this, we have how many kids doing the salad or choosing salad bar, 9/20. And we are subtracting the 3/25 that chose deli. Let's see, common denominator that they both have would be, I think, 100. So I would multiply this side by 5. So I'd have 45 over 100. Multiply this side by 4. Minus 12 hundredths. 45 minus 12, 33. 33 over 100. And I don't think that can be simplified by anything. 33 can be divided by 1 and 33, 3 and 11. 100 can't be divided by any of those. So that's how many students, or that's the fraction that chose salad over the deli sandwich. What fractions of students chose pizza or chicken nuggets? Pause and try this on your own. So since it's saying pizza or chicken nuggets, that's telling us that we're going to add them together. For pizza, we have 3/20. Chicken nuggets, 1/10. So we're going to add 1/10. Common denominator would be 20. We don't have to change 3/20 at all. Multiply by 2 plus 2/20 would be 5/20. That can be simplified by dividing by 5, which would be 1/4. And our last one down here. What fraction more of students chose a deli sandwich rather than a burger and fries? Again, what fraction more tells us that we are doing subtraction. Deli sandwich was 3/25. Burger and fries was 1/10, so we're subtracting 1/10. Common denominator between these two would be 50. So we're going to multiply this side by 2, which would be 6 over 50. Multiply this side by 5. So we would be subtracting 5/50. 6 minus 5 is 1. Keep the denominator of 50. There's our final answer. Okay, so the key steps to adding and subtracting fractions that you need to write down, and I will be looking for in your notes, is first, rewrite fractions to have the same common denominator. Add or subtract the numerators. Keep the denominator the same. And then write the sum or difference in simplest form. So for every single addition and subtracting fraction problem, these are the steps to follow. All right, if you were stuck, go rewatch parts of it for better understanding. Come with questions tomorrow.